It was a dark and stormy night. The waves of the ocean continued to crash into the ship, rocking us back and forth as me and my crew stood, marooned in the middle of the sea. No land in sight, no sign of the weather calming down. For us, it seemed that the more the time passed by, the heavier the rain poured. And just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, the wind suddenly began to pick up speed. Thunder rolling through the skies. As the other men rushed to their posts, I quickly tugged the head sail and the mainsail tight, turning it clockwise, then counterclockwise in hopes that the sails would fill the wind to help stabilize the boat from the violent lashing of its blows. The constant downpour of the rain mixed with the sheer force of the wind became harder and harder to complete my task, making it almost impossible as I slipped and slid across the deck, while also holding onto the sails for dear life. After multiple attempts, I finally was able to get the sails to tighten when out of nowhere, I began to hear an angelic voice. What was that? I thought, looking around at the rest of the crew, thinking one of them was singing, but alas, none of them seemed to be the source. And just for a moment I stood there, wondering who had bellowed such a melodic tune while the rest of the crewmen were busy frantically trying to help us survive this treacherous storm. It must have been the wind, I told myself, and began to pull onto the sails once more when suddenly I heard it again, that angelical voice coming off the starboard bow of the ship, calling to me, as though it was calling my name. Immediately, I became more curious to find out where that sound was coming from, so I walked over, only to find nothing, when once more I heard it again. An encompassing feeling of strange desire to know where that beautiful voice was coming from told me to look over the railing of the ship. And to my surprise, when I looked over, I was shocked to find that woman there, struggling in the water, holding on to a loose rope off the hull of the ship. That's strange, I said confusedly to myself. There were no women on the ship. Where did she come from? Looking at the state she was in, it seemed she was in dire need of saving, as though she had been trying her best to stay above water this whole time, clinging onto that small piece of rope. When she finally looked up and saw me watch her from above the deck, her eyes widened, filling with tears and exasperation as she called out to me for help. Never have I encountered a situation like this, so I called out to the other men and asked hurriedly if any of them had a life jacket to spare this poor woman. A deckhand from across the ship yelled out, "Yes, it's just out below deck." And quickly I ran to fetch it, putting one on while grabbing another for the woman, running across the deck with worry that she may not hold on much longer. Without a second thought, I jumped off the ship and plunged into the ocean, spare life vest in hand. Immediately I bobbed up to the surface like a rotten egg and gathered all of my senses, looking around trying to locate where I'd last seen the woman. There she was, at the very left side of the boat. Instantly, I sensed a great fear of danger. The woman was no longer struggling. She had stopped crying for help. She had stopped holding on to the rope. Instead, her face began to fill with an evil look. Her eyes were no longer helpless and desperate, but instead of bright, glowing pink gaze piercing into my soul as she stared at me ravenously. She lunged at me, grabbing my head and forcing me underwater. I struggled for a while, when suddenly I was able to break free from her grasp. Coming up for air, I gasped. Again, she grabbed my head, forcing me under so she could drown me. Flailing around, I grabbed for her arm and forced her underwater too, struggling to subdue her as I did. After what had seemed like forever, I began to hear multiple familiar voices from above the deck calling to me as I continued wrestling, flailing, gasping for air, trying to subdue this creature. One of the men threw a rope by me, beckoning me to grab it. Seeing this as my one chance to get back to safety, I used whatever strength and force I had left to dunk her head into the ocean before breaking free of the Siren's grasp. frantically swimming towards the rope, lurching for it. As soon as I was able to get a grasp of the rope with my left hand, I immediately started to feel a tug at my feet. First one hand, then two. I suddenly felt myself pulled off the rope and dragged back under the water. Swallowing a bunch of seawater, I tried my best to fight and break through the surface again, but she had her hands tight around my ankle, holding me, drowning me. Deeper and deeper I felt her drag me into the depths, but I could not let her have me. I could not let this be my end, and so I began to kick. With all my might I kicked and wriggled my ankle loose from her grasp, kicking her, pushing her farther away from me, and then began to swim back to the surface. When I reached the top, there was the rope, still floating, still waiting for me. With no time to waste, I lunged at it, grabbed it with both hands and shouted, "Pull me up, damn it! Pull me up!" As the deckhands began to pull me up and I started to ascend over the water, I heard a blood-curdling scream. The siren leapt to me one last time, clawing at my feet to pull me back into the ocean. Gathering all of the anger and frustration I had in me, right before she could grab me, I landed a clean kick to her head, knocking her back into the water and out of reach. The men began to pull me in faster, and as they did, I could not help but look back. I watched and waited at the last place I saw her fall into, waiting for her to come back up and try once more. But there was nothing, just a deep, blue darkness. When I finally made it back onto the deck, I lay there on the ship floor for a moment, in silence, still in shock at what had just happened as all the men gathered around me, bombarding me with questions and concerns. The only thing I could do was nod and close my eyes. There were no words I could say, or emotions I could feel. After a while, the voices of the men began to die out as one by one. They all went back to what they were doing. I just lay there. Slowly, I began to sit up and lay my head against the ship. Facing up, I looked at the sky and inhaled deeply, then exhaled. All at once, the heavy rain stopped. The winds grew calmer. The rushing of the waves was no more. Just peace and serenity. The realization that I was this close to death, this close to being just another tragic sailor, it haunted me. But because of that encounter, that close call with the Grim Reaper, disguised as a beautiful damsel in distress, it made me grateful to see another morning, grateful to see another day. Until now, I still have a sense of fear in the back of my mind when I'm out at sea. That won't ever go away. But the greatest fear I carry inside of me now is not making my life have meaning. That night could have been my last, but now I know any day can be my last. It dawned on me that night. I've never lived a life worth dying for. I know she's still somewhere out there, waiting for me. Maybe next time in the form of a bottle of whiskey, or a whistle from a dark alleyway at night. Until then, I'll be making the most of what I've got. And all you sailors out at sea, if you hear an angelic voice on a ship filled with half-drunk men on a stormy night, God bless your soul, 'cause you might just be sailing right into death's door.